Abortion is the number one issue going into the November election. In simple language, Republican leadership claim an unborn fetus has rights that the local governance and law enforcement have jurisdiction over. And for the rest of us living in reality, we say a mother must have the right to choose what she does with her own body. In fact, a solid majority of Americans oppose a federal abortion ban, as a rising number support access to abortions for any reason, according to a brand new poll highlighting a politically perilous situation for candidates who oppose abortion rights as the November election draws closer. Around 6 in 10 Americans think their state should generally allow a person to obtain a legal abortion if they don't want to be pregnant for any reason, according to the Nork Center for Public Affairs research. That's an increase from June 2021, a year before the Supreme Court overturned the constitutional right to the procedure, when about half of Americans thought legal abortion should be possible under these circumstances. Americans are largely opposed to the strict bans that have taken effect in Republican-controlled states since the Supreme Court's ruling 2 years ago. Full bans, with limited exceptions, have gone into effect in 14 GOP-led states, while 3 other states prohibit abortion after about 6 weeks of pregnancy, before women even realize they're pregnant. But who is behind this top-down diktat that removes women's reproductive health care and criminalizes them for their own choices? Well, it's all written down in Project 2025, Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans' mandate document for leadership, the same document that wants to ban gay marriage, interracial marriage, pornography, transgenderism, ban books on all of the above subjects, and introduce Christian nationalism into public schools. And the man at the top of the organization, the Heritage Foundation, is Kevin Roberts, who's been found to have close ties and receives regular spiritual guidance from an Opus Dei-led center in Washington, D.C., a hub of activity for the radical and secretive Catholic group. Roberts acknowledged in a speech last September that for years he has visited the Catholic Information Center, a K Street institution headed by an Opus Dei priest, on a weekly basis for mass and formation of religious guidance. For decades now, the organization has thrown its resources at penetrating Washington's political and legal elite, and finally seems to have succeeded through its close association with men like Kevin Roberts, Bill Barr, and Leonard Leo. Like Roberts, Leo also has links to the Opus Dei-linked CIC. He praised the center while also referring to his political opponents as vile and amoral current-day barbarians, secularists and bigots who are under the influence of the devil. Democrats, including Kamala Harris, have been sounding the alarm on Project 2025 to warn voters of what a second Trump administration could do. So, I combed through Kevin Roberts' speech from last September, which he delivered at the CIC, as he spoke candidly about his strategy for achieving extreme policy goals that he supports but are out of step with the views of the majority of Americans.
Think about what we believe as Christians. As Roman Catholics, we believe that no abortion can be morally justified. And even in most American politically conservative circles, either in particular party apparatuses or in organizational movements, that is not, by any stretch of the imagination, a majority opinion. By any stretch. And in fact, if you look at public opinion polls since the glorious Dobbs decision, that's become an even more difficult position to hold. In fact, I can think of, just as I'm mentioning these comments, 2 U.S. Senate races that purportedly the pro-life candidate lost because he adhered to that position. Never mind that dozens, if not hundreds, of candidates who held that position won their races. That's not the story, right? Because too many in the media and in politics want to make it impossible to adhere to that very justifiable position, difficult as it may be.
And he knows it. He knows that a solid majority of Americans oppose a federal abortion ban. But in this speech, he makes the point that pushing this extremist Catholic view upon America is entirely achievable, provided lawmakers follow the guidance of the Heritage Foundation.
And having initially been trained as a military historian at Virginia Tech, that fell out of favor, so I had to go down like the politically correct road and do other kind of history. But I still see public policy through the lens, if you will, of military affairs, which is to say, pick the battle on ground of your choosing.
So much of his advice uses military metaphors, which is even more dangerous.
You can't escape the reality that our inability to use the same vocabulary from our faith in policy on the issue of abortion has an effect on electoral outcomes. And it probably will next year. As you know, if you track the news, this is very much in the news for the political right over the last week. That's precisely the point. So what do we do about it? You expect me to give you the solutions. Well, I have some advice. I don't know that I have solutions. If you're running for a U.S. House seat, just to think of one example, and you're in a district that's 50-50, then you have to find a way to talk about that issue that neutralizes the disdain that half the electorate has for what I might just call the Catholic position. And so just to continue with this example, because I want to be as optimistic and helpful as I can, Heritage, which is, of course, focused on public policy, we've spent a lot of time in the last year with some other pro-life organizations not having to worry so much about the law and about the policy, but on messaging. How is it that we can be better messengers for our side, not betraying our principles, but leading with messaging, which of course in this case focuses on the mother, focuses on the second life, also has we ought to have a certain comportment as we're talking about that on TV and on the radio. These are all good. You see, we can do these things without betraying what we believe. But then ultimately, if a savvy kind of hostile reporter wants to ask follow-up question after follow-up question, eventually they'll get to the question that someone who believes what we believe on abortion will have to answer honestly. And that's the rub, because ultimately that's what the radical left is doing.
And his advice on how to circumnavigate the media when discussing gay marriage is extremely suspect. He knows it's not the majority view. He knows it's antiquated, entirely unequal and offensive to most, but he doesn't care.
Another policy area, very much related, obviously, by definition, is marriage. And same sort of contours there in terms of the friction between what we believe in our faith, which is that marriage is between one man and one woman forever. I mean, I'm just going to set up the friction between so-called traditional marriage, which at Heritage we just call marriage, and same-sex marriage. We have to be extraordinarily careful in how we talk about it. If you adhere to what is the teaching of the Roman Catholic Church on marriage, what do we do about it? The same sort of attitude. You have to, unfortunately, you have to neutralize the opposition to our position by saying, we accept what the law is, but we're working toward what we think is a much better outcome for civil society. The first politically conservative organization last November to say, we're not going along with the misnamed Respect for Marriage Act. And while we respect the men and women who are voting for it in the U.S. House and U.S. Senate, it is unconscionable that people who present themselves as political conservatives, I don't care about party affiliation, as political conservatives would deign to vote for such a thing. And when we were told we ought not do that it would cost us funding, we went and spent $2 million in key races to try to flip it. We knew there was like a 5% chance that we would be able to do that. But our point was, as savvy as we wanted to be in messaging, as hard as we worked to make sure that our opposition did not become personal friction with members of Congress with whom we agree significantly on other issues, we also knew that that was an issue on which we had to take a stand. For those of us who are in politics, is that, even at Heritage, where we're really zealously focused on policy, not elections, policy outcomes often are determined by who wins the election. So we have to pay attention to the elections. The challenge for us is we feel like Rome, Washington, is on fire and that there isn't enough time. But in fact, we are on God's time. And it's trite to say that, but we also know that it's true. And we know that Mother Church doesn't think in terms of days and months and presidential election cycles. She doesn't even think in terms of decades. She thinks in terms of centuries and millennia. And I have to tell myself, as an American exceptionalist, a historian of the American founding who loves this country and can never give back to it what she has given to him, that even America can get it wrong sometimes.
This speech proves that Heritage and Project 2025 is deeply strategic. Nothing they do happens by accident. They are expert manipulators who favor the long game. They won't rest until America is branded a far-right Christian nationalist nation, full of Christian soldiers doing battle with anyone who advocates for a modern, progressive society.
And what I'm suggesting is that while, of course, there is a friction between our faith and policy, and how we navigate that friction is important, in some cases, that friction's actually overstated, or at least misperceived to be bigger than it really is. I'm a big boy. I don't want half an enchilada. But if I can go get one in a piece of legislation and come back and get the other half next session, sign me up for that all day as a political conservative. Radical incrementalism. Go get 50% if you can. I'm just going to let you know, doing conservative public policy, that's rare. Although it has happened this year. We've had 8 states that have passed universal school choice. At Heritage, we consider that the whole enchilada. Other states are passing half. Texas will probably pass half next month. You put that on any policy, even apply it to abortion, even apply it to marriage, apply it to religious liberty. And maybe you're not getting half or a quarter or 10% of the enchilada, you're getting a morsel. But at least you got the morsel. The point is to tie that to a strategy that will let you get more of that enchilada. Now I'm making myself hungry. Question narrative framing. This is the most important thing to do tactically. If you're someone who's really involved in a particular issue, do not have the debate on terms of the other side. Do not even take the first step. I used to coach debate, so you hear that coming from me. Those of you who are attorneys, of course, spent 3 years perfecting this in law school. Do not accept the narrative framing of the other side. On marriage, on abortion, this is, just to go back to the abortion issue, what's the number one thing Heritage and the other pro-life groups are telling members of the House and Senate right now who are pro-life, but don't know how to talk about it? Stop talking about it the way the left wants you to talk about it. Talk about the fact that many of them want abortion to be legal until birth. Put that question on them. And when you ask that question, thank God more than 90% of the American people don't like that idea. But finally, I would be remiss if I didn't say that there are sometimes all of the meekness, all of the savvy, all of the strategy is immaterial. And sometimes we just have to fight. And right now, we have to fight. It's not a time to develop friendships with the other side. It is a time to take our fist, figuratively, Father Charles, and bust them in the nose. Because they hate what you and I believe. We're as active with state policy as we are with federal policy, because we see much more hope in the short term for getting the kind of policy reforms we like at the state level than we do at the federal level. Some of those, like in Des Moines, wonderful, wonderful legislative session from our vantage point, like on every issue. It's not a narrow pass in that state legislature, it's wide open. But now those soldiers, I love continuing with metaphors, those soldiers get to come to DC. And maybe in 2025, maybe later, the pass in Washington, which is, we could barely fit through single file, gets a little bit wider. That's our theory for policy change that we're operating under.
Kevin Roberts is a dinosaur. And what you're seeing here is him being extremely tempered with his language, being careful not to come over as a violent extremist. But read between the lines, and it's clear that he is a cultural and religious warrior who has the support of Donald Trump and the Supreme Court. And his excuse is that American kids are being indoctrinated into cultural Marxism.
I mean this word when I use it. I don't do hyperbole. Indoctrinated kids into cultural Marxism.
But what is that exactly? A culture that gives women autonomy over their bodies? A culture that allows you to love who you love and marry whoever you choose to marry? That's not Marxism. It's just normal, civil society all over the world. Kamala Harris has a big job in November. She and the Democrats are the only party representing everybody. An inclusive society without limits on your freedoms, on abortion, or on religion. So, please share this video and expose the far right for who they really are. A dystopian, male-dominated control group. They aren't patriots. They are self-proclaimed exceptionalists. Americans do not want to wind the clock back tens or even hundreds of years. We need to lead the world on inclusivity, diversity, human rights, and dealing with climate change. You don't have to be a Democrat to care about democracy, but you do have to vote for it. I'm Anthony Davis. You can find me on the 5-Minute News YouTube channel and podcast, on Wednesdays co-hosting Uncovered, and on Sunday on The Weekend Show with MeidasTouch.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.